Hi, friends. Welcome to the session. We should write a new ditty, Tom, for each session. Just little
A new thing.
and while we vamp, right? Welcome. We're talking about we're recording this after November. Some of you may be wondering what happens after November when you're working on regular decision applications. Should you shift things? How do you know, first of all, if your application's even doing its job? I'll talk a little bit about that. Then I'm going to kick it over to Tom to talk about college list tips for regular decision. It's such a good idea to add a couple schools that you're pretty sure you can get into, especially if you don't have those schools on your list yet. I'm going to talk a little bit about the UC personal insight questions because I've got a little boot camp coming up this weekend and I want to give folks a sneak peek, but also just some good tips if you're applying to the UCs. I'll spend a few minutes on that. And then Tom's going to talk about how you can save yourself a whole bunch of time by writing super essays. Throughout the session, throw your questions into the Q&A. If Tom's talking, I'm answering questions. If I'm talking, Tom's answering questions. And on these sessions, we can usually get through 50 or more. So please send your questions. We'll get through as many as we can. And with that, I'm going to start. I'm going to share my screen here. We've got, oh, by the way, 58% parents, which is rare. It's rare that we have a session that's more parents than students and counselors, but that's really cool. So here goes. 3, 2, 1. All right. So as you probably know, if you've ever been on a session that we've done, we're pretty big on values around here. So if you've ever done the values exercise and you're a student, or even if, let's say, if you're a parent, I want to encourage you to take a look at this values list. And the reason I think it's valuable, the reason I think it can be important is that I really want you, and I'm speaking to students now for a second, to be able to orient your application based on the things that are important to you. So maybe 6 months ago on a different webinar, you did this, or maybe you're like, wait, what, values? No matter what, I would encourage students to do a values exercise again. And what that means is taking a look at this list and going, all right, what are the 10 values that are most important to me right now in my life? Once you've got this sense of like some of the values, you can, if you want, whittle it down to top 5. But the next thing to consider is looking at the application that you have, and it could be an application that you submitted for an early action, early decision application. It could be just an application that you're working on because you haven't submitted any early applications. But I would say put the elements of your application on a single doc. We call this an almost done doc at CEG. And essentially, you put your personal statement, you put your activities and awards list, you put your additional information section, and then you put whatever supplemental essays you're working on. Put them all on one page, and then go through and do what I call a values scan, where you look at different parts of the application and you go, okay, in this case, this student talks about how he became resourceful, fixing shoes with strips of duct tape and teaching himself how to fix a bike and how to swim. And so all of these are revealing different values like adaptability and resourcefulness. You'll see in here, this student talks about he went through some difficulties in his life, but he raised his grades, worked hard to get involved in athletics. And, later on in the application, or in the essay, he talks about getting involved with students at his school and providing students with information to prepare them for college. So what you'll see along here is essentially just Google Doc comments, naming the values that are coming through clearly in the application. And I would recommend starting with a personal statement and doing this. And then even going down to the activities list, you can see I did this a long time ago. It is in 2017, but it still stands true and it's still useful. You can see the student recruited members, shows an initiative. He motivated his teammates, which shows leadership. And what you'll start to do is you'll start to see some different themes, hopefully repeating. Now, the goal here, I think, in your personal statement is I'd love at least 4 to 5 values to be coming through really clearly. Ideally more, depending on, how much you're packing in here. But I think with these activities, the way you're describing them, you can bring 2 to 3 values into each activity. So if you'll notice here, he's using, for example, some active verbs, planned meetings, recruited members, advocated for college readiness, provided information on college applications, part of a statewide honor society. That's 4 or 5 values right there. And if you can do this again and again in your application and you see that there are tons of values coming through, that's a pretty good sign that your application is quote unquote doing its job. What is the job of the application? To reveal skills, qualities, and yes, values that you'll bring with you to a college campus. So that you want to show them that you're going to be just an awesome community member, bring lots of different skills and, awesomeness. You can even look at your additional information section. So let's say you're filling something out and, this student noted he was the first student at his school to ever pass the AP Physics 1 exam. Shows obviously his intelligence and shows his leadership. He's modeling, hey, I want to go and, break new ground in my school community. So that's a value scan. You might also be wondering, well, what are the values that are important to colleges? Well, Tom and I both did an analysis of what are colleges looking for, broadly speaking. And we've got this list of what we call admission nutrients. And here are some of the things that we hold that colleges value. Sorry, the screen share is getting all wacky. But things like intellectual curiosity. Whoops. Pausing because screen share. Should be back in a second. Hang on.
It's sharing. It's just zoomed in a
I
lot.
think it's back. Beautiful. My interconnection, there it's back. All right. These are the qualities that it might be good to check and see if they're coming through somewhere in your application. If in your application you're showing all of these things, intellectual curiosity, service to others, leadership or initiative, collaboration, consistent engagement, which is to say you've got activities that you've been working on for a few years, that's probably a pretty good sign that your application is quote unquote doing its job. So just to recap, do a values scan, right? Like figure out what your values are, like what's important to you, and then look and see, okay, are my values actually coming through my application? So I've said, for example, that creativity, for example, is an important value to me, or maybe creating a sense of belonging is an important value to me. Are those things that are important to you coming through in your application? And then part two, are these qualities that colleges come and look for, are those coming through in your application? And you can usually figure that out in about, I don't know, 15 minutes of a scan. And that's what I've got. Those are some two hopefully useful resources. Tom, I'm going to kick it over to you, and I'm going to jump into the Q&A.
Sounds good. I only got through 2, so our promise 50 or more, we're getting there. 48 to go. Okay, so just in case any of you are new to College Essay Guy and this is one of your first sessions, my name's Tom. I use he, him pronouns. I've worked at College Essay Guy for a total of 3 years now, and my role is pretty amorphous. I do webinars like this with Ethan. I do YouTube videos, podcasts, blogs, guides. Most recently, one on extracurricular activities, if that's of interest. And my background is in college admissions and college counseling. So prior to working here, I worked in the admissions offices at Pomona College and College of the Holy Cross for a total of 6 years. So I know a lot of what admissions officers are looking for. Feel free to ask questions along those lines in the Q&A if it's helpful to you. And I also used to work as a college counselor in a high school, working with lots of students and families on applying, particularly to more selective colleges, which tend to be, many of you may have some of those on your list if you're coming to College Essay Guy for support, because typically it's more selective colleges that have college essays that they're requiring students to complete in their process. But I'm here to talk to you a little bit about your regular decision process and how to maybe change your college list or approach. If you did apply to some schools, in the early application, early action, early decision round, how do you maybe want to approach and prioritize the action steps that you have if you decide you want to apply to more schools through regular decision? So I'll go ahead and share my screen and we'll get going with that. Okay. So we're not sharing that on the web. We're doing a slideshow. Perfect. Okay. So just to kind of give you a sense of the college going landscape in the US, regular decision is the second most commonly offered decision plan by US colleges. The first is rolling admission. I have some data to show you kind of if you were to look at all you may have heard in presentations before, like there's thousands of colleges in the US. And sometimes people are like, that's surprising to me because I've only heard of 20, right? There are a lot of places out there beyond some of the schools that you may have heard of, when it comes to the ones that are in the media a lot, or maybe are circulated a lot in your own community or ones in your own backyard. So I think just, we always say as counselors that it's important to keep an open mind when it comes to your college list, and just know that there are more options beyond those super reach schools out there, which tend to be where many students and families gravitate their energy because lots of reasons why they might be doing that. So most regular decision applications are due on or around January 1st. It's good to be aware of those exact deadlines because sometimes it might be like January 3rd. Maybe a college will let you, for example, if they're really nice, maybe their deadline is on a Monday instead of, on a weekend day. So you have the whole weekend to put the final bells and whistles on your college application. Some are probably going to be more in that vein. Others, maybe do a few days beforehand. So just being aware of those deadlines, that final week of, or that first week of January, is a good idea. So you know which schools to prioritize when it comes to those action steps, items, maybe some college specific essays you may need to write. And then if you are interested in applying to more selective schools, which, as I mentioned, tend to be a lot of families who come to College Essay Guy for support, we do recommend maybe having a list of 8 to 15 schools total. This is very much a generalized range. The number of schools total that you should apply to will very much depend on your own circumstances, your own goals, the amount of schools that you applied to in the early round. If you have an acceptance already in place at a school that you really could see yourself attending, and you're like, hey, I would be really happy if this is where I end up going to school in the fall. I'm going to shoot my shot at other schools in regular decision and not, spend a lot of time applying to likely schools, because I know I want to, I'm really happy with what are the options that I have in place. It's financially a good, match for me, culturally good match for me. So those questions are ones that you'll have to ask yourself, and you can lean on your family, maybe a school-based counselor for, how many make sense for your situation in particular. But this range of 8 to 15, I would say, tends to be a pretty safe number of schools. So that way you aren't putting your eggs in so few baskets, but you're not kind of doing this shotgun approach, which is what you may hear of online, or you may have heard that term before, where students are kind of just applying widely to a bunch of different schools that don't really have any common thread in terms of like fit or programs that are a good match for you. It just, sometimes students will just cast their net really widely at schools that they've heard of before, but they don't really know as much about or have concrete reasons as to why it's on their list. So I would caution you against either extreme, too few schools or too many schools. The Goldilocks number here is probably a good match for you. And the only population that I would say I have some explicit, you may want to bump the number up a little more, is if you are a student tuning in or family who have high financial need and you are an international family. Those tend to be the populations where applying to schools that meet 100% of demonstrated financial need is a good idea for your particular situation. And because those schools are a lot more limited in terms of number and are highly competitive usually, it's a good idea to maybe apply to 20 or so schools given your financial situation and the heightened competition for international students. So as I promised, here's some data from the Common Application related to different colleges rounds that they give. So one round that I'll talk about a little bit is rolling decision. So it's a good idea to have, I'd say, some rolling decision schools on your list. Basically, the earlier you apply to that school, you hear a decision back within a couple weeks. So it won't be with regular decision. If you apply around that first week of January, whenever the school's deadline is, you typically won't hear back till about mid-March about your decision. The college will gather all the different applicants that are in their pool, look at data reports and get a sense for, oh, gee, how many students are coming from this part of the world, or how many students in our pipeline are interested in this academic program. The college is going to be asking themselves a lot of those data-based questions based on who's in the pool. And so in kind of shaping their final class, they usually move through applications for a series of several weeks and are putting together that final built class that they feel really comfortable with in terms of meeting their institutional priorities, and release that class out through their decisions in mid-March. But with rolling, you actually get to know really a lot sooner than that. So it's definitely a good idea to, I'd say, have some rolling admission schools on your list, just to, again, have that security and that confidence that there is a school out there that wants you, that you would be a good match for, that can be an option among your mix of schools. So that's just something to consider. If you did apply to schools through early decision or early action, you're not alone. This is definitely becoming something that's more common and popular among the college admission landscape. So more and more school students are applying to schools early action or early decision. But if you didn't and you weren't ready, or you needed more time to put together a strong application, I, for example, am working with a student right now who academically junior year wasn't necessarily his strongest. So he's prioritizing regular decision in his process because he wants his senior grades to be folded into the discussion and evaluation of his candidacy. And if you were to apply early action, there's not as much of a guarantee that the colleges will be taking into consideration his mid-year senior year grades into the evaluation. So depending on your own situation and if you weren't ready or you needed more time or you needed to bolster your grades, whatever the outcome may be, it's totally okay if you're highlighting regular decision as your main option. Just know that having a balanced college list and not only putting your eggs in the highly rejective regular decision basket is really something that we recommend. We'll share a video in the follow-up email to this session about finishing your college application in 2 weeks if you haven't started, just in case you are just getting started with things with college. You're not super behind. It's not as if you can't put together a really strong college application if you're starting today. There's lots of tools that we have in place at College SAI to get you on your way in the next 4 or 5 weeks, ready to submit by that regular decision deadline. So if you did apply to schools through early decision and early action, it's usually a good idea to start working on your applications for other schools, but you don't actually have to submit them for regular decision until you know for sure you want to apply there. Because what if you were to, for example, get into your early decision school? That would be great, right? Because if you applied early decision, it means that you are planning on going there. So you may want to work on your applications and have them ready to go, because you'll typically won't hear back from an early action or early decision school until mid-December. What you don't want to do is not do any work for regular decision schools and just assume that early decision is going to work out for you. It's still a competitive process for many students. You never know exactly how the outcome is going to go, even if you are highly likely based on scattergrams or data to be admitted there. Get your applications ready to go, but don't necessarily feel like you need to hit submit until after you hear back from your early schools, because those application fees can start to add up, and no need to send in earlier. You don't get any points basically for sending in an application early for a regular decision school. It's only rolling decision schools where the earlier you submit, the more likely you are to get hear a decision back quicker. It's also a good idea to use your early results to kind of get a sense for how on target you were with your most students when they're putting together a college list will have a range of likely schools. Sometimes people use the term safety school for this, target schools and reach schools. If you get a lot of early results back and you are getting admitted all across the board, maybe you decide, hey, maybe I was kind of underestimating my chances here and playing it safe. Maybe you can apply to more reach schools that initially you thought were not quite within reach for you. On the other end of the coin, if you do hear early results back and they aren't as positive as you were expecting, that may be a sign that maybe your expectations for the schools that you are admissible for, the programs that you're admissible for within that college might be a little bit of a stretch. And so that you might want to use those decisions in those final 2 weeks before regular decision to decide, do I have this healthy range of likely target and reach based on the news that's coming in from these early schools? Do note, though, that it doesn't mean I don't want you to be changing your entire approach by the time mid-December comes around and you hear back from an early decision school. If you weren't admitted and it was a highly selective school with a less than 30% acceptance rate, it doesn't mean that you weren't a strong applicant. And it doesn't mean that you should go back to all your essays and be like, what went wrong? I must have made a mistake here. Oftentimes students aren't admitted, or whether they're deferred or they're not admitted to a top choice school. It's not usually because of a weak application per se. It's oftentimes because of institutional priorities that are really fixed, and very much a staunch part of the way that admission officers have to make decisions. And there wasn't as much you could have done differently to change that outcome. So of course, we're all crossing our fingers that you do get into these, your early choice schools, but don't have it be this kind of alarm bell moment of you need to scrap and start completely from the beginning. But it can open up some questions and ideas for what are some things that I want to highlight in my regular decision schools that maybe I didn't have the opportunity to do for my early schools, have some things solidified or changed within me in terms of my values, my roles and identities that I occupy in my community, my academic interests. So if you have any newfound awarenesses from the time you were applying to early schools, it's a good idea to maybe think about those in your regular round. I do want to make sure to have enough time for the UC PIQ section and the super essay section, but I do just want to give a tip for if you are struggling to find schools that are a good match for you, that are on that more likely and target range. Many students that we work with say that they have more difficulty finding schools that they're excited about that are not quite those reach schools. it's a good idea to maybe look back at your previous applications for early action or early decision schools if you did that, and point out the things that you wrote in your, if you had any why us essays, for example, you probably cited some research opportunities or courses or the way that a certain school structured their curriculum. Maybe you applied to a school that has an open curriculum like Amherst or Brown, and that's really exciting to you. Amherst and Brown are not the only places that have open curriculums. There are many schools that have that. Or maybe you're really excited about Northeastern because they have a co-op program where you can work instead of actually taking full-time classes as part of your undergraduate college experience. Northeastern's not the only school that has co-ops. There's lots of other places that have them, like Clemson, places like WPI, Worcester Polytechnic Institute. So if you have particular residential colleges, a lot of people will say, like, I love Yale because it has a residential college system, and you are with the same students for a long time, and you bond, have traditions or whatnot. There are lots of schools that have residential systems that are very similar to that Yale experience. So whatever the kind of quality or attribute of the schools that were on your early list were most resonating with you, whether that's academically, whether that's the quarter system versus semester system, you can use tools, AI-based tools, for example, list building tools, to try and get a sense for schools that offer parallel similar programs. And maybe think about including some schools that don't quite have those sub 30% acceptance rates that guarantee you some of the features and parts of the experience that were most exciting to you with your regular decision schools, but maybe not with those scary admit rates. Last thing before I'm turning the mic back over to Ethan that I just want to put out there as a list building tip for regular decision is to think about maybe these three categories of schools as you're putting your list together. So as I mentioned before, rolling admission schools are ones where the earlier you apply, the earlier you hear back from them, usually within a couple of weeks. It can be really empowering to get a decision back from a school and just have that in your back pocket. Here's a list of a few schools that you may want to consider adding to your college list that do offer rolling admission programs. University of Pittsburgh is one in particular that I know many students that I've worked with are really interested in, really excited about. And it's a rarer school that they are able to hear back from earlier than mid-March through that regular process. Another one, maybe this is a little ironic, or I don't know if that's the right use of ironic, since there's lots of opinions about that. I'll have to ask Alanis Morissette. But colleges that don't have required supplemental essays, this is a great way to, because we know it's a lot of work to put together unique writing samples for each individual school. We have a section of the webinar about how to limit the amount of hours spent writing essays. However, I also acknowledge that it's nice to apply places where if you already put your common application together for early action or early decision schools, you might as well apply to places where you don't have required supplemental essays. There are many colleges that, such as the ones that you see here on this list, where you don't need to write anything beyond your personal statement to be admitted. Several of them have optional responses that you can sometimes submit through their, after you apply through the Common App, you might have some optional video responses or optional essays that you can submit through your application portal to an individual college. But to actually send in the app there by a deadline, you don't need to write an extra essay. So that's another thing to consider if the regular decision process, you're looking at the clock and you're like, I don't have enough time. It's a great way to benefit in that way. If applying to multiple schools is prohibiting, we always want to make sure to let students know about fee waivers because they are generally pretty easy to get if application fees are outside of your family's budget. So definitely don't let the number of schools on your list start to get daunting when it comes to the financial commitment. There's definitely lots of things in place that colleges will allow for you to make sure to de-emphasize that and de-escalate that. All right, Ethan.
I got us to 25. Oh, even 26. So we're halfway there. This is a game that Tom and I are playing, I guess, all of a sudden about can we answer 50 questions live? And we are going to make it happen. So let's talk UC personal insight questions, because I imagine some of y'all are applying to the UCs and they're doing like a couple weeks. The UC personal insight questions are, and this is only going to take about 9 minutes, by the way. So if you aren't applying to the UCs and you want to get a snack, now's a great time. Common App, as you probably know, allows you to pick from 7 prompts. It's got a 650 word limit. And yeah, it might be a little more creative in approach. Whereas the UCs, you're choosing from 8 prompts. You're choosing 4 of them, 350 words each, which quick math will tell you that's 1,400 words. And straightforward, direct answers, totally fine. In fact, bullet pointing your answers is great. It's what I'm going to recommend. But the question is, what are they looking for? Well, fortunately, the UCs are pretty awesome about including that information on their website. So here are the 13 points of what they call a comprehensive review. The UCs look at your application holistically, and we're not going to go through these in depth right now because this is like the crash course version. You can Google these. But things like achievements in special projects. So this is stuff that you've done outside of school that may not necessarily show up in your transcript, or special talents, achievements, and awards that, let's say you've got some awesome skill in, I don't know, juggling while jogging, and that didn't necessarily wasn't featured as heavily as you wanted it to be. And that for you has connected to lots of different sides of who you are. That could be something interesting to put. It doesn't have to be that weird. It could be that you've got some skill in debate and you're like, you know what, just putting this description of my debate involvement doesn't really get at the awesomeness of what debate means to me. That's what these personal insight questions are for. But, and I'll say this again later, make sure that whatever you're writing about is somehow connected back to one of these points of comprehensive review, because that's how you score points, as it were, in your application. You're trying to differentiate yourself among other students at your school applying to the UCs. And the reason the PIQs matter now, I think more than ever, is that the UCs dropped standardized tests. They decided to go test blind. So even if you submit ACT and SAT scores, they don't care. They're not going to look at them. So here are the topics, and here are some quick tips on each of these topics. Crash course version. The first prompt, and again, you're going to only choose 4 of these because there are 8 total, is on leadership. And I think, y'all, if you've got something to say in the leadership zone or range, go for it. And think broadly about leadership, like responsibilities that you have at home, awesome. If you work and you've got, I don't know, you've got the keys and you're the one locking up at night, to me, that's an example of leadership. So what you're going to do is you're going to pick one example, your favorite example, or the one that you feel like is the most elastic, shows lots of different sides of you, and you're going to hopefully start your application strong. Now, if you can't, if you don't have leadership stuff, okay. Do you have some creative stuff? And you can think creative also broadly here. It could be that maybe you play an instrument. But if so, I'm kind of curious, like, well, do you play other instruments? Because you don't necessarily have to focus on like the piano essay. It could be that your creativity expresses itself in terms of musicality in a variety of ways. So you can kind of broaden and go, okay, how does music, that influence on my life, how does it influence different sides of me? And I'm going to give you a brainstorming exercise in just a minute. But you can also think creatively in terms of, how do you solve problems? So let's say you love coding and your creativity manifests itself in terms of the way that you code. It doesn't have to necessarily be art making. Of course, some people would say coding is an art. But you can think broadly about how your creativity manifests itself. Third is the greatest talent or skill. Quick tip for this one. I wouldn't recommend writing about volleyball being your greatest talent or skill, or insert another sport, just because I don't know, when I hear that, I'm like, is volleyball really your greatest talent? I want to know underneath the surface, like what what side of yourself does volleyball allow you to explore, express, experience? So maybe you're the catalyst. You get everybody hyped. Everybody gets fired up when you're on the court, even when you're not on the court. And so your greatest talent or skill is like, I don't know, your enthusiasm or your way to motivating people. And sure, you get a paragraph in there about how that manifests on the court, but how does that enthusiasm manifest itself in the classroom? Or how does it manifest itself at home when you're, I don't know, having board game night with your family and you're trying to like, cheer up your younger sibling after a tough day. So let that talent or skill speak in terms of your, more broadly. Significant educational opportunity or educational barrier. This is an opportunity to talk broadly about something that you experienced, I don't know, maybe over the summer. Say it was an internship, or it could even have been like a work opportunity. Anything that helped you learn some stuff that you feel like is going to help serve you well when it comes to being an awesome college community, member of a community, member of a community? Yes, member of a community. I was going to say member of a community college. That's not what I meant. A member of a college community. Like, bring it. What are those things? And I'm going to show you some sample topics in just a minute, but it could be everything from, a volunteering experience where you learned something valuable. It could be that there's some extracurricular that you experienced that was like a significant educational opportunity. Or maybe you designed something or you did like an Eagle Scout project. These are all significant educational opportunities. Now, some of you face educational barriers. Before you devote a whole personal insight question to it, you might be able to use the additional comments section. And what is the additional comments section? Well, if you Google additional comments, college essay guy, you'll find this here blog, how to use the UC additional comments section, and you'll see exactly what it looks like. Here it is, additional comments section. There are actually two of these sections, and it'll give you some examples of some stuff that you can put in there. And I'll pop that into the chat here so you can see that. But if you feel like, okay, I really feel like I need to explain this, I don't know. I still feel like a lot of the things that, like the challenges you experience, you could explain briefly, and you don't have to dedicate a whole PIQ to this. So my tip is going to be, if you're going to choose this one, focus on the opportunity rather than necessarily the barrier, because you may mention the barrier in another part of your application. 5, significant challenges. If you've experienced tough things at home, it could be personal challenges, parents, dealing with difficulties. It could be work related. There's a big range of things that could go here. But I would say my tip here is briefly name the challenge and the effects in like the first third. So these are 350 words. In the first 80 words or so, challenge and effects. And then transition to what did you do about it in the middle? And then what did you learn at the end? And it's going to be straightforward, informational, not a lot of time for poetry here. It's just like, here's the thing that happened, what I did about it, what I learned. One of my favorite prompts is the academic subject one. Why? A couple reasons. One, it connects to one of the 13 points of comprehensive review where they ask for outstanding performance in one or more academic subject areas. But two, it allows you to show your nerdy side and to really show how you've prepared to do University of California, AKA UC level work. So pick a subject that has some broad application. Maybe it's psychology. You're interested in, I don't know, going into psychiatry, let's say, and talk about how your interest in psychology has manifested in the classroom. What class did you take? What did you learn about? And then next paragraph, go outside the classroom. How else did you explore psychology? What did you learn when you were Googling in the middle of the night, when you were trying to, fall down like YouTube rabbit holes? And then was there anything else related to psychology that you were able to make a connection of in terms of your extracurricular activities or your summer programs or projects or any other courses that you took? See if you can, again, think broadly about the subject so you can connect it to lots of different sides of you. And then if you like, give a little why major at the end. In other words, why you feel like you're going to, excel in your particular major. But make sure if you do that, that the UCs that you're most interested in actually have that major. And you can do this with a simple Google search. So don't be like, I definitely want to study, I don't know, 18th century architecture. I don't think it's actually a major. But I want to, let's say architecture. Let's just go architecture. Make sure the UCs, all that you're applying to, have an architecture major, or whatever the major is. Number 7, another one I really love, school or community service. How have you made your school or community a better place? I think if you don't choose UC7, you should probably weave in community service to 2 of your other ones. So find a way, for example, to weave it into a leadership personal insight question, or maybe your creativity has manifested in your volunteering work. So see if you can weave in community service to the others if you don't choose 7. Because when I read a whole application and I don't see community service, I'm like, oh, I hope it's in the activities list. But especially if you don't have strong activities, meaning like, you've got space for a bunch of activities. But if you don't have strong activities, you want to bolster your activities list by focusing on and thickening, which is to say making a bigger deal about those things that you have participated in that are sort of in that volunteer community service realm. Finally, you've got 8, what makes you stand out as a strong candidate for admissions to the University of California. This is kind of a catch-all one. Probably a lot of the things that you're going to say that connect back to these 13 points of comprehensive review are going to fit in the first 7 prompts. So first check to see if it fits in another one of those prompts. But if it doesn't, like I was doing a presentation for the San Francisco Chronicle last night, and a student was like, hey, I'm a homeschooler. And I was like, yo, I bet you're really self-directed. That kind of quality, sure, it could be your greatest talent or skill, but might be nice to weave in here. So if you, for example, were a homeschooling student, I could see that being, if you talked about skills and qualities you developed, help you stand out as a strong candidate for the University of California. So those are my quick tips. Actually, I've got 2 more. The best place, I think, to find your PIQ topics is by creating your activities list, your activities list, your activities list. This is your brag sheet. This is your resume. And I want you to write that first, because then once you've got all that information in there, you're going to be left wondering, ooh, what else should I say? And that's what your PIQs are for. But some students write their PIQs first, their personal insight questions, and then they write their activities list and they end up just repeating the information. So I want you to give yourself the challenge to create your activities list first, do a really thorough job, and then go, okay, what else could I say here that's going to add to my application? And for that, I recommend this exercise, the BB's exercise. It's kind of a silly name, but if you answer these 5 questions, what did you do? What problems did you solve? What lessons did you learn or skills you developed? What impact did you have? And how did you apply what you learned? You'll have tons of content for a personal insight question. And I know I'm going fast, but I want to make sure we've got time for Q&A, and also Tom's got one more section. But these 2 resources, the PIQ topic or the UC activities list and the BB's exercise, are going to be some really, really good ones for generating content and figuring out what to write about. Okay, apologies. I know that was very, very fast. Just to review some of those tips. 1, information over poetry. Straightforward is totally cool. Make sure you connect it back to the 13 points of comprehensive review. Leadership, academic subject, community service, these are all strong topics to potentially consider. And I want you to think of them broadly. Okay. By broadly, I mean, don't just think of leadership as like being the president of a club. Think about leadership in the bigger sense. Quick PSA, if you're interested, in 3 days, 3 and 4 days, I'm leading a boot camp on the UC PIQs. We'll put the link in the chat right now. Thanks, Rebecca. And I'm going to be walking through lots and lots of, let me just show you real quick. It's pretty comprehensive, the boot camp. I'm going to be walking through basically all the resources you would need. It's got 24 different video lessons, 20 plus example personal insight questions. I'm going to talk you through how to create that awesome activities list. Day 1, we're going to be brainstorming and outlining, and then you'll have big homework to do. And then day 2, you're going to pop in, and I'm basically going to give you some feedback on how you're doing on your outlines. The bootcamp comes with this really thorough tool that basically walks you through advice on how to write every single one of these with lots of specifics. And as you'll see here, lots of videos that I've recorded. Best news is it's pay what you can. So we've got, an asking price here, but really we want no one to be turned away for the sake of funds. It's $0 if you are a low-income student and that's what you can afford. Totally fine, and you'll get exactly the same content. And for those of you who can't afford to give something, all proceeds for the course are going to go toward our Matchlighter Scholars Program, which helps to provide one-on-one support for students who are low income. So that's my crash course on the UCs. I hope to see some of y'all this weekend. And Tom, back over to you.
Awesome. We're up to 42 answered. We're getting there. We're almost at 50.
We're going to do it.
And there's a lot of juicy UC related questions in there that I left
Juicy,
just
juicy.
Ethan. Yeah, juicy UC. Okay. So I'm going to switch gears, and I'm really glad, Ethan, you primed our audience for the BB's exercise, because that is also one of my biggest tips for writing super essays, regardless of if you're applying to the University of California system, the UC application. If you are applying to lots of schools on the Common App that have many supplemental college-specific essays, the BB's exercise is a great way to identify a topic or two that can be maybe creatively modified or recycled or rehashed, calibrated from college to college to answer their prompt specifically. Okay, I have some slides to go into a little more depth as to what I mean by this. But something I wanted to share just as a tip for you, since it is November 13th, and you may be wondering, okay, I have a few weeks left to apply to some regular decision schools. What's the best way to spend my time right now? And I can tell you what a way not to spend your time right now is to be, gee, I really should have taken calculus instead of pre-calc, or I should have done this thing differently, or I should have, you can go on a whole laundry list of rabbit holes of things you could have done differently in the past, but that really isn't going to be the most productive use of your time going forward. So, when you are thinking about, okay, I mentioned some of the schools like colleges that don't have supplemental essays that you have to complete that you can add to your regular decision application process to lighten the load in terms of your workload. One of the most, I would say, easiest low lift ways to distinguish yourself from other candidates in this process is to demonstrate interest at the colleges you're applying to. Some schools that you have on your list are not necessarily going to care as much of how many times you visited campus or emailed them, or maybe if you did an interview or not. I've worked at two institutions. Both have very different approaches to demonstrated interest. At Holy Cross, where I went to school, my alma mater, and my first admissions job, they were really big on demonstrated interest, and they still are. So students who interview there, who visit campus, who fill out this optional Holy Cross response that students can complete in their portal after they submit, that basically is a short essay to be like, how is Holy Cross on your list? What have you learned about it? Why are you interested in going here? It's not required, but students who had no contact with the school and didn't fill out that response, and I had a student on my caseload as a counselor who didn't do this. She was like, well, it's pretty much in the green on the scattergram. I feel like I'm going to get in. And I told her, I'm like, you might get waitlisted if you don't do any interest there, because they're telling you it's a really important part of their process. Lo and behold, she didn't listen to me and she was waitlisted. And the family was like, I can't believe she got waitlisted. And I'm like, I can. And I actually told you that would probably happen. So if a school tells you on their common data set, for example, that they factor in any capacity above not considered, if it's considered important or very important on the line called level of applicants' interest, it's usually a good idea to at least attend a virtual tour, any formal documented session or opportunity that's offered by the admission office is a really good way to get great information for supplemental essays or optional responses, or just have a sense that you know why you want to apply to the school. And B, it's a really low lift way for you to gain some points in a school's process, and not have yourself be relegated to the wait list, if that's your process. So this is just a few other notes when it comes to demonstrating interest at schools. Visiting campuses virtually in person, I'd say, is the easiest way. Some schools offer interviews, which is another way to distinguish yourself. They're less important now than in previous years across the board. But if it's an optional opportunity that schools allow you to do, they tend to be offered at some of the smaller liberal arts colleges still. That's something that you definitely want to think about potentially opting into, to help distinguish yourself even further from other students. And then, of course, always contacting your regional admission officer. A few of the questions that I got in the chat are ones that I was like, I don't know the answer for this particular school, or how this school reads their application, or how they evaluate a portfolio. It's always a good idea. If you have questions like that, you can always ask the person in admissions who is your regional admissions rep, the person who reads files from your state or country. So that way, A, your email interaction counts as demonstrated interest, so you gain some points there. And B, you just get clarity straight from the source about a question that you have lingering that is more verifiable than if you were to scour the internet or ChatGPT or other areas, Reddit, etc., to get that answer. And we have some links about demonstrated interest that we can share as well, in the follow-up email to this session. All right, so when it comes to supplemental essays, and writing what we've been referring to as a super essay that you can use at multiple different colleges, that ask similar responses, as you start to put together your regular decision college list, you'll notice that this is a general breakdown of the types of questions you'll start to see from college to college when it comes to their college-specific essays. Probably the most common essay that schools will offer is some form of a why us essay. Why are you interested in attending insert college or university? And this is an opportunity for you to talk about not just amazing things about that other school, but also things that you have to bring to the table and contribute. The question to ask yourself here is, what excites me about this particular college and university? And what prior experiences, skills, or interests do I have that I can leverage at this place and dive into these research opportunities and classes and hit the ground running? That's the kind of message that you want to communicate to the colleges is, I know what you have to bring to the table, and I have relevant skills, background, experiences, interests that can help me plug right into those and start to do great things together. That mutual kind of, we are perfect for each other communication message. Another common question that you're going to see, these two other largest categories here are why major essays, why you're interested in studying the fields that you've explored, or talk about an extracurricular activity that's very meaningful to you. One essay prompt, and actually I'm going to do a little exercise or visual that explains or shows what this is, that has come a lot more has become a lot more frequent in recent years, are questions asking students to talk about lived experience and perspective that's a part of their identity, their background, communities that they're a part of, and how they can contribute, reflecting on those experiences, how will that contribute to our campus environment at Insert College? So I wanted to actually show you a student that I worked with, this will be a great way to I think, illustrate the power of a super essay and the way that it can really minimize the amount of work that you have to complete individually. Okay, so something that we'll share as well in this as part of this webinar is a updated version of what we call our essay tracker at College Essay Guy. Many of the students that we work with one-on-one here at CEG, as we call it, use this tracker to organize the essays that are required for the different colleges they're applying to. So this is an essay tracker from a student that I worked with a couple of years ago. And as you can see, he has lots of different selective colleges that he is applying to: Brown, Columbia, Duke, MIT, Notre Dame, Penn, Princeton, Stanford, UNC Chapel Hill, Yale. Clarifying point, this was from a couple years ago, so don't be looking at these essay prompts and be like, that's not the one that I have on my list. This is from a few years ago. It's pretty highly likely that these individual schools changed their prompts this particular year. So always go with the most updated information in the common application. But by way of an example, what I just wanted to show you is that if, say, for example, I was told this student, okay, I want you to go into the Common App, put in all the schools you're interested in applying to, and then from their question section or their writing supplement sections, I want you to paste in all the prompts that you're being asked to complete for the particular programs and majors that you're applying to. Because sometimes, pro tip, you'll have different essays you may have to complete for individual schools like USC, University of Southern California. They have different essays if you're applying to the engineering school versus a school for arts and sciences. So it's usually a good idea to do the low-hanging fruit, put your colleges into the common application, and answer the questions for each individual college before you get to the actual essays, because it will tell you what you specifically have to complete based on programs of interest, scholarships you may want to apply to, honors programs, things of that nature. So for this particular student, he did that assignment that I gave him, put in all of your schools and all the essays that you're asked to complete. And he was asked to complete a total of, let's see here, 39 essays is what I'm counting. That seems like a lot. Seems very intimidating at the onset. So what we did to minimize the amount of work and to minimize having to create a custom original piece of writing for each individual schools was we looked at the prompts together and tried to identify opportunities from his background, from his experiences, his extracurricular activities, his areas of impact that would be the most relevant or applicable to multiple schools' questions. So as we started to kind of look through multiple schools, from Brown to Columbia to Duke to MIT, we saw lots of questions that had things along the lines of talk about times where you advocated for something you believe in, or MIT brings together people of diverse backgrounds. Describe one way that you've collaborated with people who are different from you to contribute to your community. We believe there's a benefit in sharing and sometimes questioning our beliefs or values. Who do you agree with on the big important things? Or who do you have interesting disagreements with? What are you agreeing or disagreeing about? So as we looked through kind of these different questions, we realized the student that I worked with, he was involved in a historical society in his town. He was like the only young person on this pretty much exclusively like retiree plus entity of people. And he very much saw this as an opportunity to lend the younger generation's voice to important issues in his town. And there were sometimes disagreements that came generationally from those dialogues that he was a part of. So in terms of answering a question that talks about a time that you were challenged by a perspective different from your own, or talk about a viewpoint or lived experience or perspective that's important to you, him writing this essay about being part of this historical society, being that younger voice, answered both prompts that were around conversations around difference, as well as talk about a community that you're proud of. Or there was one school that asked, what's something about your UNC Chapel Hill asked, if there's one thing you could change about your community, what would it be? Please explain. So we started off with kind of like a first step essay, a first original super essay, where he talked about essentially his commitment to racial justice in his community based on being so close in proximity to Ahmaud Arbery's murder. And he talked about, again, as I mentioned, being a part of the historical society in his town, and advocating for policies that were grounded in ethics and not just decisions that would potentially economically damage tourism and interest in the town if by negative publicity. That was a big concern among especially a lot of the older generations in this historical society. So he wrote this initial super essay, and as you can see, he made sure to really have it be tweaked and calibrated for each individual school, like describe how it has shaped the way you would learn from and contribute to Columbia's diverse and collaborative community. So Columbia is specifically asking him to talk about ways that this lived experience would be applicable to his time at Columbia. So he made sure to include a little section at the end that had specifically to do that. Side note, the student ended up being admitted to Columbia. So worked out. This Duke one here is, if you could change one thing to better your community, what would it be? Please explain. So he'd slightly tweaked the response to talk about one of the areas of his community that he wasn't as thrilled about. And then he again changed the wording slightly towards the end to be, if more corners of my community were able to openly voice their perspectives in a similar way, we'd be able to tackle with open ears and hearts difficult and nuanced issues that plague our community. So again, this essay was able to be used by, in some way, shape, or form, trimming down word counts, changing the way that the wording was formed to meet the response that the individual college was asking. He was able to use it for, let's see, a total of 9 of his total essays, which is obviously not going to be completely eradicating his entire list of 30-something he had to complete. But to have about a quarter of your essays be essentially the same content, but tweaked and recalibrated, again, minimizes the burden on you as a student and still allows it to be customized and unique in answering the specific question that each individual college posed. So the best way I'd say to go about forming content for your super essay is to, again, put all your essay questions into an essay tracker. Notice the overlaps that you see in the way that questions are being phrased. Can you potentially talk about an experience that's a part of your life that could answer multiple schools' questions? And then create that first template, larger word count version of it, trim it down as you see fit, and use something like the BB's exercise, which Ethan explained before, to actually go through and identify what was the thing I was involved in, extracurricular, community, etc. What are issues that I noticed, action steps that I took, what are the things that I learned in the end? And those insights that you gain through filling out that chart are really good core pieces of content when you're actually putting your essay together in a formal written way. All right.
Yay. There are some more that have come in the chat. A lot of this stuff, some folks are asking about it. You can tell, I mean, it might feel like kind of weird that I'm like, you should Google this, but part of why I do that and let folks know about this is that I want you to know how relatively easy it is to find some of these resources. And so sometimes that's why I'm Googling things. So we've got time for more Q&A. I'm going to let Tom jump in. You can jump in for these. I want to remind y'all that in case folks don't know about it, we do, have some spots left open now for one-on-one. If that's something that you're interested in, you can reach out to us. We'll put a link in the chat to let you know about how the process works. We're super happy to support. And students who are even on a short runway, which is like, my deadline's in a couple weeks. We're familiar with that process, how it goes. So yeah, you'll find much more about that in the link below. So questions, what questions do folks have? Let's see. Tips on alumni interviews. Yeah, if you'll look at so there's a guide that I linked into an earlier question on interviews. Forgive me, if you Google interview college essay guy, you'll find a really epic guide that we put together, and even a short summary that's 2 pages long, and a YouTube video where it's like I give like a 20-minute answer in the video, but it's silly and fun, hopefully, and it'll show you how to prepare for that. And I would prepare for an alumni interview the way that I would prepare for interviewing with the Dean of Admission. And you'll see some tips in there. But broadly speaking, I would say kind of do the work to write a why us essay mentally. And as you're sort of doing that work to think about, well, why would I want to attend this college? Certain questions are going to come up about, would this school really be a good fit for me? What are the kinds of programs that, that I might, for example, if you're wanting to study, I don't know, I studied theater, so I'll pick that. wanting to study theater, like what are the theater opportunities are available? First of all, do some research. And as you're doing some research, more and deeper and newer questions are going to occur to you. And those are the kinds of questions that I would say come in equipped with. Smart questions, things that you can't find when you Google. And yeah, I would say bring those into your interview, but also have some good reasons for being interested in the school. You're also probably in that interview going to be asked some questions. There's a big list of questions that you'll be likely to be asked, and you can prepare for those by doing lots of great writing. The writing that you're doing right now for your personal statement, for your supplemental essays, they're not going to have those in front of them probably. So a lot of times what students will do is sort of, because they've spent time writing those, some of those will turn into answers for questions. So one of the things that, I advise is like, if there is a particular extracurricular opportunity or activity that you've been involved with, find a way, if you can, to connect whatever the question is they're asking to this thing that you want to talk about. And there are some ways that you can practice that, and you'll find more of that in the guide. By the way, alumni interviews are not often make or break. They're more like, did you show up and do the interview? If so, check the box for demonstrated interest. Coming from a former Northwestern alumni interviewer, I was having beautiful conversations with students. I was like, this student is so amazing. They should definitely be accepted. And then, wah, wah. So that's a small sample set, but just know that these are not. Don't stress too much over these. Um, you know, Ba-dum-bum-bum. What else? There's more coming in. I'm kind of pausing on some of these questions. Some of these things, okay, I'll go for this one. I have a few schools I'm interested in, but my favorite is over 50 to 75% acceptance ED. That's great news, first of all. I can't afford it, ruh-roh. I would say, I don't know if it's too late to apply early decision or not, but I would say, ooh, tricky. Well, you asked a couple questions here. How can I stand out, or what do you recommend? First of all, I would talk to your counselor, because your counselor is going to have more information about your total application. And I feel nervous to give you advice just about this one school without knowing anything else about you. But let me give you some general advice that I think will be helpful. I would say if finances are an issue and you're not, likely to afford it, it kind of depends on if you're in the low income category or if you're in that middle income category. So, quick flow chart. If you are a low income student and you apply early decision and you are likely to get financial aid, and you can do this by filling out, maybe I'll find like a cost calculator. You can basically find out what you're likely to have to pay. And in some cases, let's say for me, applying Northwestern, I didn't apply early decision because I didn't even know what that was when I was applying to college. But they were able to give me a financial, I was able to get a scholarship based on my EFC, which was 0. That's my estimated family contribution. And so that worked out for me. But if you're in that sort of middle income category, it starts to be a little trickier. Um, so I would say, I'm going to give you broad advice again. Broaden your list of schools, and make sure that you're applying to a range of schools, including schools that you can get into and that will potentially give you money. And if you've got awesome grades, and if they take test scores, awesome test scores, you're going to have some cool options. So I would say broaden your options. And like I said earlier, I would say talk to your counselor if you can, so you can get more specific advice based on your situation. Sorry, I'm being kind of general and vague there. Ba-dum-bum-bum. Ethan, I volunteered for Match Letters. Thanks. I volunteered again. When will I find my student? Hopefully ASAP. You can email us through the website on the Match Letters to say to Erica, hey, I'm looking for a student, and we've got students for you. So we'd love to have you. Let's see. Are you saying for PIQs they should not overlap activities, since we're doing activities first? I think the content shouldn't overlap too much. So if you're putting all the stuff you've done in your activities, you don't necessarily have to repeat all that information. But I think in terms of your topics, it's totally fine to overlap. In other words, if you're putting that you've participated in debate in the activities list, I think it's fine to write that as a personal insight question topic. Tom, do you want to just keep doing it this format with you typing and me talking? Is that working?
Sure, I'm also happy to switch gears if you'd like. There was a really good question that I just wanted to point out about,
Oh, please.
can I use AI to help identify potential themes and overlaps of super essays? And that is something that I think it just opens up a good conversation around what's an ethical use of AI in our eyes and what we know from intel from different colleges and universities. This actually is a topic that is hot off the press with some of our colleagues who are attending reader trainings at different colleges and universities. In general, we're pretty, I feel at least pretty comfortable just saying that using AI as a research assistant, for example, for things like research in colleges, for identifying courses, research programs, opportunities that are in line with your interests at different schools. To me, that's a very ethical use of AI. It's using it as a research assistant to help you identify unique things that each school has to bring to the table that you might be a really good fit for, or might be a really good feature in your why us-based essays, why major essays. And I would say the same thing for something like helping identify parallels or overlap for things like super essays. As long as you're not like copying and pasting and saying, write the essay for me, and just copying that into a text box, sending it into a college and calling it a day. I think using AI as a thought partner, as a research assistant, as a synthesizer, is very much something that, you know, we do in our work. It's something that I think is a very smart use of tools that are at your disposal and doesn't quite cross the line into plagiarism, which is something that you don't want to be doing directly, you know, calling some words your own that are not in this process.
Here's one that's somebody's asking, what if a student gets asked about something controversial in the news in an interview? First of all, that would be like an incredibly poorly trained interviewer to be like, so what's your thought on the Middle East conflict? Like I mean, I like almost 0% chance that they're gonna do that and try to set a trap for a kid because they really want, you know, they're gonna ask broader questions. These interviewers, generally speaking, want students to succeed. But I'm going to answer a broader question. If a student is feeling compelled to write about something that is potentially political, controversial, stigmatized, I would say focus on the values because values are the students, and so I'm talking to students now, your values are probably universal and probably non-controversial. What do I mean by this? If I'm a student coming in and I have in my message box, which is like the 3 or 4 things that I want to say in my interview, and I'm just going to keep on the theme of theater because that's I'm thinking about my Northwestern interview. I had just come off this, our Zoom format just changed. I had just come off participating in these like drama competitions and I wanted to talk about them. And so if someone asked me a question about, let's just call it broadly something political, and I knew that I wanted to talk about my theater work, wait, those don't have anything to do with each other, or do they? One of the things that I'm interested in is theater and doing in particular political theater that speaks up about social justice issues. And then boom, you know, I just spent the last few weeks in these theater competitions and I'm particularly interested in creating my own work. And I feel like the social justice lens is something that's really meaningful to me. So anyway, you see what I did there is I basically went, okay, what's the connection between this political thing and the thing I want to talk about? There's probably some value that overlaps. Creativity, adaptability. You know, these are all sort of these broad concepts that can help a student segue in between those things. So for that list, if you just Google, I'll put this in the chat, but if you just Google values exercise, you'll find that list. We're at time, but Tom and I kind of like to go over on our sessions. So we're going to do one more question each. Tom, you pick one and I'll pick one, and then we will call it a night.
Okay, well, one that I was just answering via text right now is, do schools that claim not to take into consideration demonstrated interest really not take it into consideration? It's a great question and a valid one. I would say from my experience, schools that do factor it into their process typically tend to be pretty open about it because they let students know this is a way that you can distinguish yourself from other candidates that is actionable and something that they actually can control. There are some institutional priorities, and I will say this, right, that colleges are more secretive about and more cagey about. Maybe sometimes a school, for example, is more heavily weighing a student's academic major or interests more so than maybe publicly perceived. So that is a reality of the business side of college admissions that I just want to be frank and transparent with you about. But with demonstrated interest, a school doesn't really gain anything by hiding that piece of their process behind closed doors because it's actually something students can do. Any student can do, regardless of, you know, as long as you have an internet connection or can tap in access to that, you can demonstrate an interest to any of your colleges and universities. So I think colleges are more wary of spilling secret things that a student doesn't have as much control over, or could be falsifying an application to try and portray an image of what they're looking for. But demonstrated interest doesn't fall into that category. So I would say schools' honest assessment on the common data set of where demonstrated interest falls into their process is pretty accurate. And at the same time, at Pomona, we didn't factor demonstrated interest into our decisions. And at the same time, I was more likely to want to advocate for students who I had met at high school visits, who had emailed me, who had visited campus and had questions for me, who showed that basically Pomona was a place they really wanted to be. I obviously wanted to, if it was possible with the priorities that I was beheld to as an admission officer from the top down, if they met priorities and had these touch points, I was more likely to try and admit students that I had that positive relationship with. So I definitely think that it's not necessarily effort that's super wasted unless you are going so overboard with a school that's like, we don't factor in at all. You obviously want to prioritize your efforts for the schools that say it is considered in some way, shape, or form. But regardless, it is an area of this process that I do think has some unwritten power and can help build a connection with someone on the other end who can potentially be an advocate for you in a committee setting.
Last question. Somebody asked about the BB's exercise. I know it's a silly name, but it's basically the exercise, just to review that really quick. It's inside that Pay What You Can course. Again, no financial barrier for joining. My last time mentioning it, but I'd love to see some of y'all there. By the way, someone else asked, if you're not applying to the UCs, I'm doing another boot camp on the personal statement and supplemental essays. If you're opted into anything on our email list, you'll get a notification because I think we're going to put that out like really, really soon, like maybe in like less than a week. But the BB's exercise, broadly speaking, is answering these questions right here. So if you want to like do a screenshot moment, you can. What I did, problems I solved or addressed, lessons learned, skills gained, impact, and how I applied what I learned. And I think this is such a valuable exercise for generating content for the UCs. It's like if you spend 25 minutes doing this, it's going to write itself. Like you're going to have so much content. Inside, you'll also see this like epic list of activities list verbs. Let me see if I can click that. Is it working? Oh, it's this link. There we go. Which has got, essentially think about what are the different responsibilities you had. My computer slows down when I open up new tabs sometimes. There we go. Okay. So yeah, anyway, you'll see things like this, like the epic list of activities list verbs. It'll give you basically lots of different ideas about things that you can put in there. And this is also obviously really useful for your actual activities list. So again, activities list first and then work on the BBs. All right, we're going to call it there. Thanks, y'all, for being here. And we heart you. We send you all the heart emojis. We hope this has been useful. And we'll post this to our YouTube channel. Smash that like button. No, I'm kidding. And and we do actually have tons of videos. Tom and I are creating videos this week, new videos that come out once a week. And yeah, that's where you can get sort of like the latest stuff that's coming out in the CEG world. And again, we'll email you when there's more on the upcoming boot camps. Thanks, Tom.
Absolutely. Thanks,
Bye,
Ethan. Thank you all for being here.
bye,
That's so
friend. See you soon.